It was supposed to be a funeral. General Eliana Voss stood at the edge of the obsidian platform, rain rolling off her dress blues like oil over armor. 27 titanium coffins stretched in a neat line before her, each gleaming under the stormlight, immaculate, empty. No bodies inside. There never were. Project Firewalkers had filed it as a catastrophic failure, vaporized on dimensional breach event. Official, clean, sanitized. But she knew better. She'd signed the ignition order. Watched them walk into the maw of reality itself. Watched the fold rip and scream, and watch her soldiers disappear without even a goodbye. Brave, foolish, volunteers, no transmission, no data, nothing, for 8 years. Until 3 weeks ago, the fold wasn't space. It wasn't time. It was the absence of both. A realm of negative geometry and thermodynamic sacrilege, discovered by accident during a failed attempt to cheat the speed of light. The Deadless Protocol, later codenamed Project Firewalkers, had been the Terran Union's last desperate grasp at an edge over the rapidly encroaching Xiran Hegemony. The Terran Union, fractured by internal cynicism and external pressure, had been watching its borders crumble for decades. Resources were stretched thin, public trust thinner. Firewalkers wasn't a hope. It was a wager. The Xiran weren't monsters. That would have made them easier to fight. They were methodical, cold, perfect in their biologic. All one consciousness divided into specialized castes, united, unyielding, and dismissive of what they call non-continuous species. Humanity was, to them, a fragmented experiment in contradiction. Worth observing, worth dissecting, not worth fearing. Until Project Firewalkers. 27 soldiers. Volunteers all. Elite. Diverse in origin and expertise. Pilots, engineers, linguists, special forces. Handpicked not just for skill but for psyche. The fold, it was believed, would annihilate anyone carrying unresolved trauma or fractured identity. The irony wasn't lost on Eliana, that in choosing the most intact, she might have doomed them all. She remembered Reyes before. How he'd smirked on the training field, too sharp for his own good. How he'd helped carry Private London when his exosuit failed. How, in a last conversation, he'd simply said, "If we burn for something." The Deadless engine was ignited on a cold vacuum world named Ananke 9. No indigenous life. No habitable orbit. Just isolation and a tethered rift generator built on principles no physicist could explain without resorting to metaphor. The soldiers marched into the breach in formation. 27 into the howling spiral. Cameras failed instantly. Biosigns vanished. And then, silence. Files sealed. Monuments built. Program buried under redacted budget lines. She buried the guilt. Until 3 weeks ago, it started as static. A ghost ping on a retired deep space array in a Kuiper shelf. 12 seconds of signal, modulated in a dead encryption format only one project ever used. No source, no signature, then coordinates. Ananke 9. The retrieval team returned shell-shocked. Their report was vague, contradictory, borderline incoherent. But one line made it to her desk, scrawled in handwritten ink. They're not gone. They're waiting. They brought something back with them. Or someone. He stepped off the dropship like gravity was an afterthought. Towering. 6'8", maybe more, broad-shouldered and lean, but stretched somehow, as though made taller by the path he'd walked. Armor fused to flesh in fluid welds, seamless, still glowing faintly at the seams. His eyes, molten. That was the only word for it. Not gold, not orange, not even fire. They shimmered with depth, like staring into a furnace through the event horizon of a black hole. You didn't see your reflection in them. You saw your end. But he knelt, not with stiffness, not out of show, like a soldier returning to command. "Permission to report for duty, ma'am." Her voice caught. She didn't answer right away. Eliana Voss had commanded legions, held the Terran frontier with bleeding knuckles. But in that moment, her voice was a child's whisper. "Sergeant Reyes?" He nodded. "We walked through fire," he said. Now he walked through them. He wasn't alone. 16 more emerged behind him, some silent, some speaking in low tones, some moving with an eerie grace that seemed to slide through physics rather than obey it. None of them entirely human. All of them wearing armor grown and grafted. Some with exposed skin layered in fractal scars. Others with shifting shadows that bent around them wrong. There was Daka, the one who never blinked. Aaron, who whispered equations in his sleep. Marin, who bled steam instead of blood. And Zhao, walking just slightly above the ground, as though gravity were an old rule she politely refused to follow. 17 of 27. The others? Eliana asked. Reyes turned. His eyes dimmed just slightly. They stayed behind, or didn't come back right. What does that mean? He didn't answer. The unified command was terrified. These are anomalies, barked Admiral Grant. Weapons-grade biologicals with no oversight. They're soldiers, Eliana snapped. They answered the call. They melted a carrier hull by stepping through it. How do you cage that? You don't, she said. You aim it. The Xiran had already raised 5 colonies by then. Arcturus Prime was next. A core world. Population, 9.4 million. Earth's industrial sister. They called it a restructuring. The Xiran dropped orbital sculptors that reconfigured the planetary crust to harvest biosilica. The planet screamed for 8 hours. By the time a recon vessel made landfall, only 0.2% of the population remained, most in underground cryo vaults that the Xiran simply ignored, like forgetting to sweep under a rug. That was the day Eliana invoked directive flame. The Firewalkers would deploy. They didn't use ships. Ships were for boundaries, for gravity and thrust. The Firewalkers stepped. One moment, a ridgeline overlooking the Ashen Valley. 5,000 Xiran troops entrenched with grav tanks, minecasters, drone clusters, and sci-binders. The next moment, they were among them. Reyes walked calmly through a super-heavy warform. Not around. Through. The creature convulsed, shrieked in 3 voices, and collapsed into a puddle of crystallized light. Zhao Song. No, not exactly. Her voice was harmonic, vibrating across spectra. The air itself folded with each note. Bunkers inverted. Neural implants in Xiran command units melted. Their minds collapsed in on themselves like dying stars. Daka moved like a strobe. Here gone, here again. Each reappearance left behind scorched footprints. Aaron reached into a Xiran tank and pulled out its future, reducing it to rust. The battle didn't last. 11 minutes. No survivors. Only heat. And ash. Something had changed in the war. The Xiran recoiled. Their border fleets withdrew. High-caste warbinders began demanding answers from the central thought. Rumors of Firewalkers spread across captured worlds. The stories grew with each retelling. They weren't seen as soldiers. They were heralds. And humanity, once seen as an errant biology experiment, now stood on the precipice of something the Xiran had no precedent for. Fear. But fire doesn't ask permission to spread. Reyes began deteriorating. Not in body, his frame remained powerful, his reflexes inhuman, but in identity. He sometimes referred to himself in plural, sometimes stared into corners like they whispered back. Once he stood in the center of the war room and whispered, "We remember how light used to taste." Zhao began documenting fold echoes, places where reality shimmered, where time hiccuped. She recorded shadows moving against the grain of light. She spoke of hearing patterns in silence, code layered into the quantum vacuum. The other Firewalkers showed other signs. One had stopped speaking entirely. Another wrote in a script no linguist could identify, except it only appeared under UV light. And one, Corporal Stetson, stepped into his barracks and never came out. The room was sealed. When opened, it was clean, sterile. Air pressure normalized, but slightly elevated carbon. No trace of him. Only a single word etched into the floor. Beyond, Eliana stood in her private quarters, reviewing footage from the Herrick's deployment. Frame by frame. Reyes disassembling a mech with a wave. Zhao lifting 3 tanks into the air with harmonics. One Firewalker who seemed to blink out of reality and back in, 3 meters closer, sword already bloodied. One frame held her, Reyes, looking up, directly at the orbital satellite camera. Directly at her. and smiling. She paused the feed. "What do we bring back?" she whispered. But part of her knew. The experiment had failed. Something else had survived, and it wore her soldiers like armor. And somewhere, in the cold between stars, fire watched back. The Herrick's footage played on a loop in the unified command chamber. No sound, just heat distortion, disintegrating metal, and 17 anomalies tearing through an army with surgical calm. No one spoke. High Admiral Grint finally broke the silence. "This isn't a weapon. It's a contagion." General Eliana Voss didn't blink. "Then be grateful it's loyal." She left the room before the shouting started again. Their fear was useful, but left alone too long, it would fester into sabotage. In the hall outside, Reyes waited. "Am I still a soldier, ma'am?" he asked, voice lower than breath. She studied him. His face hadn't changed in the normal ways. No wrinkles, no scars, but something deeper had shifted. The symmetry of him was too exact. His stillness, too complete. He didn't stand so much as occupy the hallway like a fixed point. "You're mine," she said, "until the last star falls." He nodded. "That may happen sooner than you think." They moved their base to Cairn Station, a deep space facility orbiting the dead gas giant Trappistex. It was old, armored, and most importantly, isolated. The Firewalkers needed distance, not just for containment, for them. Daka had begun meditating for 16 hours a day. When asked why, she simply said, "It keeps the shapes away." Aaron had built a miniature structure from scrap metal and carved bone, identical to a temple discovered on a dead exoplanet thousands of light years away. A planet the Union had never visited. Zhao stopped walking altogether. She hovered now. Always. Her boots hadn't touched ground in 6 days. They still trained, still obeyed orders, still saluted, but they were burning slowly from the inside out. Eliana stood in the observation ring, staring down at the training pit. She watched Reyes phase through solid tungsten, step through time, and appear behind a kinetic drone to tear it in half. Dr. Valen, the Union's top psionics researcher, stood beside her. "They're warping field rules in real time," she whispered. "Local causality bends to accommodate their presence." Plain English. They're no longer fully here. They carry echoes, fragments of whatever they pass through. Can it spread? A pause. "We don't know. Yet. Do they know?" Dr. Valen turned. "I don't think they care." The message came from deep space. Unencoded. Raw. It was Madsen. His face was warped, stretched vertically, eyes gleaming with fractal light, his voice running in layers. But it was him, or something wearing him. "I didn't come back for Earth. I came back to make it ready." Then static. Then coordinates. Eliana stared at the screen. "Where is that?" "Xiran space," Valen said. "Outer rim. Dead zone. Nothing there but listening posts in black glass." Zhao hovered in silently. "He's building something." "What?" "An invitation." Eliana briefed Reyes alone. "Madsen was always stable," she said. "Controlled. Even after that incident on Lerna 3. Reyes didn't look at her. He chose to listen longer than the rest of us. To what? The fold doesn't speak in words. It asks. It offers. And he accepted? Reyes turned, and for the first time, she saw real emotion on his face. "I think he wants us to accept it too." She thought of Madsen as he'd been, reading aloud to the rookies during long hauls, fixing that busted water pump on Ananke 9 with nothing but heat tape in his bare hands. He was the one who said, "If we're the first to step through fire, maybe we can be the last who have to." She felt something tighten in her throat. "Don't let him die like this." "I won't," Reyes said, "one way or another." The ripple effect from Madsen's transmission was immediate. The Xiran panicked. They redirected fleets away from contested zones and began mining reality anchors around their core worlds. Their central consciousness broke into splinters, shouting across sectors to identify the new threat. In the Terran Union, subcommittees convened emergency debates. Some wanted to detonate a star in the dead zone. Others wanted to talk to Madsen. Eliana shut them all down. "We send soldiers," she said. "Ours. No more debate." They prepared the strike team. Not all Firewalkers would go. Just 5. Reyes, Zhao, Daka, Marin, and Aaron. The rest were degrading too quickly. One had dissolved into a mist of light and regret. Another had started phasing between dimensions involuntarily. His scream still echoes in the subspace bands. The five suited up in silence. Reyes helped Marin calibrate her gauntlet coils. Zhao handed Daka a folded cloth, deep red, the same shade as their old unit banner. Aaron, as always, muttered formulas that had no known solution. They weren't just preparing for a mission. They were saying goodbye in their own way. As they stood at the breach chamber, Eliana approached Reyes. "If he's too far gone, we end him," Reyes said. "He wouldn't want it any other way. And if you're wrong," he looked past her, "then we burn with him." The breach flared open, glowing not white but violet. Like bruised sky, like memory. 5 figures stepped through, and the galaxy held its breath. The dead zone wasn't empty. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against your skin, a silence that echoed. The strike team emerged from the fold breach into orbit over a fractured moon, its surface blackened like slag, its veins glowing faintly violet beneath the crust. The silence wasn't absence. It was presence, dense, watchful. Every second felt elongated, every motion delayed, as if time had been rewritten in cursive. Nothing alive, nothing dead, just waiting. Zhao tilted her head. "It's humming. The whole sector. Listen." Daka frowned. "There's no air. You can't hear anything. You're not listening with your ears." Reyes said nothing. He simply looked down at the moon, where the scarred symbols pulsed like a dying heart. A rhythm older than language. He felt it in his ribs. They descended in silence. No, that upstairs. The Firewalkers simply fell, through atmosphere, through reality, phasing to the surface with the slow inevitability of judgment. The moon had no name in any known star chart. It was a rogue satellite, pulled into the orbit of a cold dwarf eons ago. The Xiran had marked it as a null body, anomalous mineral signatures, no strategic value. They hadn't seen what slept beneath it. The ground was wrong. Not dead, not inert. It felt expectant. Where the Firewalkers stepped, the dust responded, pulling slightly toward their feet. Marin measured gravitational variance. It fluctuated, randomly, as though the moon wasn't anchored properly. And in its center, the invitation. Not a structure, not a monument. A glyph of impossible scale burned into the surface. Recursive, shifting. The outer ring was kilometers wide, but the more they looked, the more it changed, depth folding into itself. It wasn't just written into the rock. It was written into possibility. Madsen stood in its center, or what was left of him. He no longer wore armor. His skin shimmered, not with light but meaning. He looked human, if you ignored the way shadows slid off him too easily. If you ignored the way the eye couldn't hold his outline without twitching. He looked up as they arrived. "No weapon, no threat, just welcome. You came," he said. His voice wasn't modulated. It wasn't possible to be. It carried through the fold itself, vibrating not just eardrums but the idea of sound. Reyes stepped forward. "You built this." Madsen smiled. "No, it built me. I just listened." Daka blinked hard, fingers tightening around her weapon. "You shouldn't exist. Neither should we. That's the point." Marin's breathing was uneven. Her left eye flickered with fold flare, barely restrained. "This is your last chance, Madsen. Back off the breach." He didn't flinch. Behind him, the air flexed, reality turning on a hinge. The sigil beneath his feet began rotating, not in motion but in definition. The math of it changed while they watched. Zhao tilted her head. "You're trying to open it." "Not open," he said gently. "Complete. The fold isn't a door. It's a mirror, a song we've only begun to hum. You think we survived it. We were rewritten by it. I accepted that. You're infected." Madsen nodded, his smile never fading. "So were we, the moment we came back." Back on Karen Station, alarms began to spike. "Commander," the comms tech shouted. "We're getting Xiran transmissions. Multiple systems. Emergency psychoreactive alerts." Eliana stepped to the console. "Explain." "They're panicking. Reports of mass hallucinations. Entire fleets jumping erratically. Civilians self-terminating." Their minds are collapsing under shared cognitive strain. Valen pushed past to read. They're all reporting the same symbol. Visuals, dreams, thoughts. The screen displayed it, jagged, recursive, burning across an alien neural cortex. The pattern that screams, Valen whispered. On the moon, Reyes moved. A blur of light and vengeance. He blinked across the scar's radius, straight toward Madsen. His arm shimmered with energy. A strike fueled by pain, betrayal, and memory. He remembered Madsen's laugh on Ananke, the way he used to quote poetry after missions. How he helped Reyes fix his shattered helmet after the fold test run. How he said, "We survive together, or we don't come back at all." Madsen didn't block. He welcomed it, and the world cracked. Reyes was thrown back, the air around him turning to liquid distortion. Time flailed. Marin fired a pulse that arrived before she pulled the trigger, and still missed. Daka launched herself into the breach, only to reappear sideways, blood dripping from her ears, eyes wide with knowledge. Too much of it. Zhao Song. The glyph stuttered. The fold rippled like water under tension. Madsen winced. For a moment, he looked human again, vulnerable. But Zhao couldn't hold the note. Her voice trembled, and her skin began to peel into light. Symbols. Language older than thought. Daka reached out instinctively. Zhao. But the syllables dissolved as Zhao collapsed, mouth still open, eyes glowing with the last of her song. Stop, Reyes roared. His voice came out wrong. Too many layers, each syllable unfolding into echoes. He stood, arm broken, jaw twitching, but his eyes burned. You were one of us. Madsen stepped forward. I am. I just listened longer. And now I understand. He pointed at the sky, at the stars beyond. Humanity always reached for fire. But fire doesn't stay still. Eventually it reaches back. The scar pulsed, and the sky began to blink. One by one, stars dimmed. Not vanished. Not destroyed. Just turned away. Fold influence expanding. Reyes lunged again, but stopped. Froze. His body flickered between now and could have been. A version of himself, not wounded. A version still on Earth. A version laughing. Madsen touched his forehead. This is the price. You saw it. You knew what we paid. We brought something back, Reyes. We're the seeds. The question isn't what grows next. The question is, will we be it? Zhao's body still radiated whispers. The light around her bent subtly, like it didn't want to let go. Aaron screamed a number, just one, and felt his knees. The number echoed into their skulls. An equation that mapped self. They had all heard it now. The invitation. On Earth, Eliana watched her monitors freeze. Then reboot. Then resolve. A voice, flat, cold, enormous, spoke her name. Not through sound. Through consensus. Every terminal. Every comm line. Every thought. Eliana Voss. And then silence. Dr. Valen clutched her head, blood running from her nose. It's not a place. It's a mind. We opened a thought, and now it's thinking about us. Eliana stared at the frozen frame of Madsen, at the recursive glyph, at her soldiers unraveling. This wasn't an ambush, she whispered. It was a welcome mat. And far beneath the crust of the fractured moon, something turned its attention to humanity for the first time. It didn't smile. It didn't rage. It recognized. Across the minds of every firewalker still breathing, a sensation bloomed. Not sound, not word, but the certainty of being seen. An image burned itself into their collective awareness. A silhouette wrapped in galaxies, weeping stars, reaching through fold light. And the fire began to spread. The moon was behind them, but it hadn't let go. They returned through the fold in silence, carrying Zhao's body between them, or what remained of her. She didn't weigh what she used to. Fold light had hollowed her, filled her with resonance instead of mass. Her form shimmered, refusing to decay, as if time was no longer welcome near her skin. Every few minutes, a ripple would pass across her body, like wind over water, and the air would vibrate faintly in harmonic pulses no one could trace. Karen Station's emergency ward was sealed within seconds of their return. A layered quarantine dome, 15 meters thick, normally reserved for biohazard events or psionic ruptures. Now it held 4 Firewalkers and a corpse that pulsed when no one looked at it directly. The dome systems, normally responsive, clinical, and clean, began to behave oddly. Doors opened before anyone approached. Lights dimmed in patterns that matched ancient musical scales. Something had come back with them. Reyes didn't speak for 12 hours. Not out loud, but in the walls, lights flickered in patterns that matched his old neural signature. Power systems stabilized only when he was near. Sleep cycles across the station synced to his heart rate. When a tech tried to run diagnostics, her console whispered his name in a dozen languages she didn't speak. And then, the voices started. Dr. Valen cataloged them first. "I'm receiving overlapping auditory hallucinations from 13 personnel," she told Eliana during their emergency briefing. The walls of the room pulsed gently with warmth. Non-native linguistics, structured patterns. But no source. Translate. I can't. The language changes with each speaker, but the structure's consistent. It's recursive, musical, like something trying to find the right shape to speak in. Zhao. Valen paused. The song matches her harmonics, but the data shows she's still singing. They stared through the observation glass at Zhao's body. It hadn't decomposed. It hadn't changed, but the glass vibrated softly when they said her name. A soft melody lingered in the air, never loud enough to follow, but never gone. She's dead. Her body stopped. Her pattern didn't. Valen ran spectral scans. Zhao's vocal cords moved intermittently, despite her lack of pulse. Neural activity was 0, but fold light emissions around her rose in bursts whenever Reyes entered the room. "She's connected," Valen whispered. "Still broadcasting." Eliana stepped away slowly, her face tight. "God help us if someone starts replying." Meanwhile, Karen's lower decks reported strange behavior. Crews forgot what day it was. Sleepwalkers moved through locked doors. One man, an engineer named Kellen, spoke for 30 minutes in a dialect known only to a pre-fold species humanity had never contacted. He couldn't remember doing it, but when they played the recording back to Reyes, he nodded. It's the fold, trying different voices, learning our ears. He didn't seem afraid, just tired. The Xiran requested contact. Their envoy arrived in a sealed thought capsule, broadcast through a field of folded qubits. It didn't speak in words, only in impressions. Eliana felt shame, dread, surrender. Then an image, the recursive symbol, burned across Xiran memory banks, now replicated in their own genetic code. Somehow, the fold had reached into their biology, not as a virus, as a correction. Then another flash, a Xiran warbinder, weeping molten ichor as its cast song turned into gibberish. Civilians clawing at the sky as they tried to peel the layers off reality. Whole ships shutting down, not destroyed, but quieted, like their purpose had been answered and no longer mattered. The Xiran had always prided themselves on unity, their singularity of purpose. But the fold had fractured that on contact. Their mental links splintered, each cast hearing a different song, a different version of the pattern, and it was driving them mad. "What do you want from us?" Eliana asked aloud. The response came from the Firewalkers' chamber. Not Madsen, not Reyes. Zhao's voice. It rippled from her corpse without air. "We don't want." Every light in Karen dimmed. Every data feed spiked. Fire alarms triggered with no heat. Half the station reported sudden temperature drops, others, fever flashes. The silence afterward wasn't absence. It was listening. Reyes stood beside Zhao's chamber that night. He wasn't moving. Not really. His body stood, but his mind had become a conduit. He saw her, Zhao, singing alone, somewhere deeper than space. Not suffering, not afraid, transmitting. The room shifted, not visibly, but subtly. Corners no longer sat at right angles. Reflections moved slower than the people casting them. "Do you hear them too?" Daka asked from behind him. He nodded. "They're not angry," he said. "No, they're curious." There was fear behind her voice, but also wonder, like standing on the edge of a deep ocean and realizing it wasn't water. It was language. Marin arrived, holding a strip of folded metal. It pulsed with internal heat, just like the glyph on the moon. This fell out of Aaron. He's not solid anymore. She gestured behind her to where Aaron sat, half in shadow, half in shimmer. Parts of him flickered like broadcast static. His skin hummed quietly. He tried to speak earlier, Marin added, voice barely audible. But it came out as math. Reyes looked past them. The fold isn't spreading. It's resonating, tuning us, preparing the next step. Daka crossed her arms. Then let's finish this. Go back through. Burn it down. But Marin shook her head. You don't burn a song. You sing back louder. Or, she added, voice low, you become part of the chorus. Reyes looked at Zhao's form and closed his eyes. I think we already are. In her private quarters, Eliana dreamed of fire. Not destruction. Understanding. 1,000 versions of herself, standing in front of the same breach. Making the same call. Authorizing the same ignition. And every version said the same thing. We thought we were breaking through. We were being invited in. Each version of her stood alone, but behind them, always the same presence. A figure made of stars. Shifting. Patient. It had no face. Just gravity and a feeling of recognition. It looked at her, and she felt her own thoughts stretch, like light dragged toward a black hole. She woke to find her walls covered in soot that hadn't been there the night before. Each mark was a word, and every word said, soon, not as a threat, as a promise. The universe watched Earth in silence. The fold had not yet spread, but it was felt. Xiran worlds fell into quiet disarray. Independent colonies sealed themselves behind radiation curtains. Terran Command received over 30 separate distress calls in 5 days, all bearing different forms of the same symbol. Recursive, shifting, whispering back at those who looked too long. They called it the Echo Sigil. Some drew it compulsively. Others dreamed of it painted across sky-sized mirrors. A few had begun to pray to it, unknowingly synchronizing their prayers in languages they never learned. It wasn't a symbol anymore. It was a presence, and it had started looking back. On a civilian transport docked at Deimos Ring, a technician named Rel stared at her daughter's sketchbook. The child had been mute since birth. Now, every page was filled with the same spiral glyph. She had drawn it while humming. Rel didn't know the tune, but it made her cry when she heard it. Karen Station became the axis of that tension. Zhao's chamber now resembled a cathedral. Not by design, by influence. Its glass panels had shifted under fold resonance, arching upward like wings, casting fractured light onto her untouched body. Engineers claimed they hadn't modified the space, yet continued to evolve, folding space slightly inward like a lens around her. The light refracted inside refused to obey standard physics. Some angles refracted the past, some future. One reflection showed Reyes staring at himself from a time that had not yet happened. Reyes stood at the center, statuesque, not praying, not mourning, listening. It's not just tuning us, he said aloud. It's remembering what we were before what? Eliana asked from the doorway. He turned slowly, before the veil, before the spark of separation. It sees us, not just now, across layers, fractals of self. You're not making sense. It's trying to. Marin deteriorated next. She didn't scream. She simply slowed. Her thoughts began to run in echo. When she spoke, others heard their own voices alongside hers, future thoughts overlapping current ones. Like her brain was slipping between moments. Valen observed. Her perception of causality has been disrupted. She no longer distinguishes time directionally. What's that mean in English? Eliana asked. She's starting to remember things that haven't happened yet. It started with hallucinations of people she'd never met. Then she drew a map, by hand, of a star system that did not exist. When cross-referenced with long-range probes, it matched an uncharted system, complete with planetary mass readings. That system appeared in the Union's deep space logs 2 days later. On the 4th planet, a recursive symbol carved into the equatorial crust, visible from orbit, as if waiting for discovery. They dispatched a drone. The system was there, and what it revealed made Valen weep. The entire world's surface pulsed with music, not sound but vibration. Mathematical harmony. The planet was singing in the same pattern Zhao had hummed before she died. Marin muttered in her sleep. That's where the mirror began. The Firewalkers met in the core chamber, those who could still hold form. Daka, flickering slightly. Aaron, now more waveform than flesh. Reyes, unchanged yet impossibly anchored. The walls of the chamber moved slightly now. Not visibly, but if one looked too long, they'd find different architecture depending on which angle they turned. Eliana joined them, uninvited. She hadn't slept in 40 hours. The burns across her wrist from touching Zhao's chamber hadn't faded. No pain, just memory. The skin now bore geometric patterns only visible in the dark. She kept seeing her daughter's face, except she had never had a daughter. You said the fold remembers, she said to Reyes. Does it remember what we did to it? Reyes's voice was quiet. We didn't wound it. We answered it. And it has questions. What happens if we don't like the answers? Aaron looked up, eyes like pale crystal. Then we become them. He held up his hand. It passed through his chest. No pain. No wound. Just transition. Like he wasn't made of atoms anymore. Just expression. Sometimes I feel like a song someone else started, he said quietly. Daka stood apart. Her breath came in short bursts. I used to think the fire in me was a weapon. Now I wonder if it was always just a beacon. Whatever comes next, she said, we're already part of it. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled. Fold light danced between her knuckles, reacting to her breath. We're still human, Eliana growled. No, Reyes replied. We're the echo of what comes after humanity. He said it without triumph, without regret, just certainty. That night, Xiran Station shook. Not from impact, from recognition. A new signal arrived, not from fold space, but from beyond it. Frequencies mapped to no known field. No stars aligned. It came from coordinates that did not exist on any axis. The computers translated only once before locking up completely. We see you. The phrase appeared across every terminal. Not in text, in thought. Minds filled with it. Eyes burned from it. Fold-sensitive personnel fell to their knees. Zhao opened her eyes. They were not hers anymore. They shone with the same violet recursion as the glyph. She sat up slowly and smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, like someone recognizing an old friend in a reflection. The lights of Karen flickered in sync with her pulse. And in the core of the station, the systems began to count. Not time, not seconds. Something deeper. A rhythm. A beginning. The countdown was silent. No numbers. No digits. Just rhythm. A pulsing thrum that echoed through the bulkheads, through flesh and bone, through breath. Some claimed they couldn't hear it, yet their heartbeats matched it. Others began to tap their fingers unconsciously. Engineers started humming without knowing why. Even the rats in the lower decks stopped scurrying and sat in perfect, still spirals, heads cocked to the beat. It wasn't counting down. It was calling. Fold resonance had passed critical. Xiran Station was becoming something else. Not just a location. A threshold. Dr. Valen locked herself in the AI core. All automated systems had collapsed, and the station's central architecture had gone into passive mode. Not offline. Not broken. Waiting. Every terminal that still worked began displaying abstract loops of recursive code. Fractal symbols pulsed on every surface, looping, multiplying. They weren't executing processes. They were harmonizing. The AI, once vocal and brilliant, had stopped speaking entirely. When queried, it returned only a sequence of abstract coordinates. Coordinates that didn't correspond to any known galaxy. Zhao sat in the medical observation ring, blinking slowly. Her body, once burned and brittle, now radiated calm. Her skin no longer shimmered. Now it glowed. Her breath moved in cycles too perfect, too precise. Her hair floated as if gravity were an inconvenience. When Valen scanned her, the data came back, symbolic. Not numeric, not molecular. The data resolved into a string of glyphs, impossible to parse with standard analysis tools. When passed through a fold field decryption lens, the shapes unfurled. Not into numbers, but into an impossible lattice of five-dimensional geometry. It wasn't code. It was design. At the center of that structure was a symbol. A name, but not Zhao's. Older, vast, coiled in recursive meanings. Something returning. Dr. Valen stared at the projection, her breath caught halfway between awe and dread. "I think she's a signature," she whispered. "A return address." Across the Terran Union, chaos rippled. Fold-sensitive individuals began to disappear. Some walked into shadows and didn't come back. Others simply flickered out like old holograms. Some were seen days later, in places they had never visited, speaking languages lost to history. At a refugee hub on Kepler, 47C, a boy was found sitting calmly in a crater where his entire city had once stood. He hummed a song no one could identify, hands outstretched, eyes glowing faintly blue. A flower grew from each footprint he left. The Xiran shut down their entire psychic network. The last broadcast from their central node was a single, looping tone. It was identical to Zhao's heartbeat. Eliana stood outside the main breach chamber. The entrance was no longer a door. It had rewritten itself, smooth obsidian walls, etched with runes that changed based on who looked at them. Valen said the symbols were watching. Daka stood inside, staring at the fold light like a shoreline. Her hands were bare. The light danced across her fingers like flame, recognizing kin. "I thought we'd be fighting gods," Eliana muttered. Daka didn't turn. "We are. Just not the way we thought." "Were they then?" Reyes stepped beside her. "They're not gods. They're us, unfinished." "And Zhao?" He didn't answer, only looked at the rhythm pulsing through the walls. "She's already walked it," Daka said. She burned and kept walking. Eliana shivered. "So what now?" "We walk the fire," Reyes said. One more time. They gathered in the fold chamber. Once sterile and industrial, it now resembled the interior of an ancient cathedral lit from the inside by a living aurora. The fold breach shimmered in the center, no longer a tear in space, but a presence coiled and waiting. Zhao stood beside it. She wasn't blocking the path. She was welcoming it. Eliana looked at her. For the first time, she saw no soldier, no scientist, not even a person, just song. The remaining Firewalkers stood in silence. Daka, her arms crackling softly with fold light. Her voice was steady, but her shadow danced in directions that defied the rune's geometry. Her final whisper before stepping in, "I'm not afraid anymore. I remember where we came from." Aaron, now a silhouette barely held together. His form wavered, a blueprint redrawing itself with every breath. As he stepped forward, he whispered, "I want to see what we become." Marin, whispering equations into her palm, eyes unfocused, like she was halfway to remembering the future. As the light took her, she said only, "I've already been here." Reyes, unchanged, but not still. He radiated intent, density of purpose, like the gravity of a choice long made. He turned once to Eliana and said, "If this is what they fear, let them." Eliana stepped forward. "You don't have to do this," she said. "We already did," Reyes replied. Zhao turned. "Walk," she said. Not a command, a blessing. She raised her hand to her chest, and for the first time, her face flickered, not with energy, but emotion. Completion, like a torch handed off. The fold shimmered. It opened for them, not like a gate, but like a memory remembered together, as if they'd already been there, as if it had missed them. The Firewalkers stepped forward. One by one, fold light washed over their bodies, rewriting them as they moved. Daka glowed with a light not visible to the eye. Aaron collapsed into energy, but his shape remained. Marin closed her eyes and smiled. Reyes looked back once. At Eliana. She nodded. Then they were gone. Zhao watched them go, no longer Zhao, but something luminous. She lowered her hand, and the fold light around her flared, then dimmed like the end of song. She turned toward the station's core, her presence beginning to dissolve into a harmonic field. Her role was done. Eliana hesitated at the edge of the breach, her boots just shy of the light. She felt the countdown inside her ribcage. Not a clock winding down, but something older, more organic. It wasn't ticking. It was beating. Her breath caught in her throat. In that moment, 1,000 images flooded her. Earth seen from orbit, the smog-lay sky over the old wards, the cold weight of her command badge. And one photo, yellowed and creased, long forgotten in a drawer. Her niece grinning on the edge of Seaside Cliff. Eliana reached for that memory, knowing it would be the last one tethered to the version of herself who belonged to the Union, to humanity as it had been. Then she stepped forward, and the fold embraced her. Not by force, by recognition. They emerged into something beyond space, beyond matter, beyond anything the mind had language for. It wasn't darkness or color, not void or volume. It was structure, a living reality sculpted by cognition, resonance, and intent. Vast minds coiled through architecture forged from language. Their presence stretched like cathedrals composed of meaning, their thoughts imprinted into the spatial fabric itself. Stars weren't born here. They were composed, notes in a vast musical equation. Gravity bent not to mass, but to verbs, as if motion itself obeyed a grammar. Memory flowed along invisible lattices, each pulse of verse in a choir older than entropy. And there, within the structure, was the song. They didn't hear it with ears. They didn't process it with thought. They remembered it. It was older than sound, older than time. A refrain threaded through the DNA of every ancestor who had ever gazed up at the stars and dared to wonder. It had been waiting for them. Somewhere beyond time, the fold sang. And this time, finally, humanity sang back. They returned with no ship, no indians, nobody's signature, no time lag. They were simply there, standing in the center of what remained of Karen Station's breach chamber. The room was still, opalescent with afterimages. The walls had melted into a seamless field of obsidian glass, reflecting not light, but potential. Every surface echoed something. Past, future, choice, regret. Movement didn't just exist. It rippled into neighboring timelines. When Reyes turned his head, ripples traced across reality itself. Not visible, but felt like the pressure change before a storm. Fold light no longer clung to them. It obeyed them. Eliana was the first to speak. Or rather, when she spoke, space translated it before her mouth moved. Her words arrived as truth before sound. It's begun. Her voice was no longer just hers. It carried the harmonic undertone of the fold, reverberations in the bones of those listening. Dr. Valen, still watching from the gallery, covered her mouth. Her instruments hadn't activated, but her mind had registered the pulse. Zhao stood at the edge of the chamber. She was unchanged, yet utterly alien. Her presence bent the air, not violently, but reverently, like the station knew her. Not merely recognized, remembered. Your signatures everywhere, Valen whispered through the mic in the walls. The wiring, the gravitational harmonics. You're imprinted across the station. Zhao didn't answer. She simply looked at the others, Firewalkers who had stepped into the fold and returned. Dr. Valen collapsed to her knees in the observation gallery. You left, she breathed. You left, and came back different. Reyes stepped forward. We came back ready. The fold hadn't expanded. It had inverted. Across the Union, psychic static faded. The pressure behind every mental veil dissipated. Sensitive minds who once reported visions and collapse now felt clarity, like pressure releasing after centuries of compression. Xiran's central consciousness stabilized. Their network of hive thoughts, once fracturing under the strain of the pattern, now unified into something calmer. Focused. They no longer dreamed of the echo sigil. They used it. Fold resonance ceased being viral. It became responsive. Where once it had erupted from static fields and impossible coordinates, now it only appeared when invited. On the Union world of Gaines, an unremarkable child with no psionic signature carved the glyph into a wooden floor. He had never seen it, never been taught it, but he said the pattern came from the Firewalkers. When asked what it meant, he smiled. It means we're not broken anymore. The Firewalkers walked among the living like echoes of a future already written. Daka passed through reinforced doors without touching them. Not phasing, remembering where the metal used to be. She moved not through space, but between decisions. Her form flickered slightly, sometimes hovering between outfits she had once worn, as if the fold hadn't quite picked which timeline to project. Aaron no longer spoke in words. His presence emitted complex data, symbols, graphs, fields of meaning that collapsed language around him. Engineers who stood near him for more than a minute walked away, unable to describe what they felt, but with tears in their eyes and new ideas in their minds. Marin touched corrupted archives, and the data healed. Not restored, not recovered, rewritten to never have been broken. And Reyes simply listened. To the stars, to subquantum background hums, to the ancient drift of galaxies echoing through space-time. When asked what he was listening for, he answered only, the last silence before the next voice. The council demanded their presence. They refused. The Firewalkers no longer operated within the Terran Union's command structure, not out of arrogance, but because time no longer worked the same way for them. Eliana, now back among them, moved like a still point in a vortex. Calm, radiant. She did not give orders. She made invitations. She spoke in phrases that unfolded in meaning long after she left a room. They're not military anymore, Valen said, watching them from a control feed. They're tuning forks. Civilization is humming with them now. Zhao visited a nursery on Triton 3. She touched no one. But afterward, 5 infants began speaking in perfect synchronization. Not gibberish, not madness. Structure. The fold had not taken humanity. It had mirrored it, and the Firewalkers were the reflection walking forward. Earth's orbit shimmered. Fold light spread in a silent bloom. No energy spike. No radiation burst. Just a visible field, like dawn unfolding over an ocean. Civilian astronomers called it a miracle. Military analysts called it prelude. But no attack followed. Only a voice. Not from the Firewalkers. From beyond them. We do not command. We remember. We do not conquer. We restore. And the voice carried through every human structure, every organic mind, every synthetic core tuned to the fold field. It was not heard. It was experienced. An old woman on Mars saw her dead husband and forgave him. A boy in a mining rig on Perseus 9 dropped his tools and wept, having remembered a lullaby his mother had never sung. A war AI aboard a defunct battleship shut itself down, not in defeat, but in peace. Fold light stopped acting like energy. It began acting like judgment. On Europa, a smuggler ship attempting to flee with black market fold tech simply vanished. In its place, a blooming tree made of light, its branches etched with runes no one could translate. Fold light didn't punish. It reflected. What came back from the fold wasn't divine. It was human. Worse, it was what comes after human. Not clean, not peaceful, not perfect, but aware. The Firewalkers no longer bled. They remembered how. Because gods, too, must learn to fall. And humanity, broken, scattered, unfinished, had walked through fire. And now they walked through gods. The fold sang in silence. Not all heard it, but those who did truly heard it, changed. Not in form, in relationship, to time, to each other, to the universe. The change was subtle. At first, people began waking with memories of conversations they had not yet had. Couples spoke in sync without realizing. Entire crowds synchronized breath and posture without planning, without prompting. Those who had once feared the Firewalkers now found themselves drawn to them. Civilians followed Daka's path like pilgrims. Engineers began dreaming in non-Euclidean blueprints after standing near Marin. One young diplomat in orbit above Titan claimed Aaron whispered entire treaties in her dreams, all in a language she'd never spoken, but now knew fluently. None of it made sense, but all of it worked. The Union tried to adapt. Committees were formed. Emergency doctrines revised. Strategic models scrapped and rebuilt around the new reality that could not be mapped. The fold had introduced uncertainty as structure. A small task force, codenamed Mirror, was assembled to study the fold's influence on human neural evolution. Their facilities were buried in radiation-shielded underground complexes, miles from any known fold site. It disbanded within a week. The reason? Their top linguist, Dr. Anasane, began speaking only in recursive loops after a single conversation with Eliana. Her final recording simply said, "The word became pattern. The pattern became thought. The thought became me." Their team's psychologist claimed the Firewalkers had become ontological mirrors and then walked into the fold light and dissolved, smiling. Not one member of Mirror could explain what they had learned, but all of them claimed they had been seen. One, a quantum theorist named Markov, refused to leave his quarters. He said if he looked in a mirror now, he might remember too much of himself. On Earth, fold light arrived. It did not burn. It echoed. It passed through buildings, people, oceans, and history. It touched bones buried beneath city streets and satellites lost to orbital decay. It reached across generations, curling into genetics, activating dormant strands of language encoded in mitochondria. A resonance beneath DNA, humming like a forgotten prayer. For the first time in recorded history, the planet dreamed a unified dream. A dream of flesh unbroken. In the megacities, those attuned to the fold began to weep not from grief, but from recognition. Elders whispered poems they'd never learned. Children woke up drawing symbols they hadn't seen. Entire neighborhoods paused, not afraid, not possessed, just listening. To something old, to something human. In a rooftop greenhouse above Manila Sector 4, a maintenance worker named Emil sat watching the sunrise. He didn't know why, but he'd felt it, like a song waiting inside his bones. When the fold light came, he didn't move. He just wept. And afterward, when his hands touched soil, the plants grew toward him, not the sun. An agricultural worker in the reclaimed Amazonia zone stopped mid-harvest and wept because she suddenly understood the migration patterns of birds, because they were singing the same glyph she had seen in her dreams. A musician in Neo-Cairo composed a piece that caused half the audience to fall into silent trance. It was later decoded as a sonic version of the fold's bass signature. He claimed he didn't write it. It had unfolded in his hands. But not all embraced it. In the black zones, regions carved out by warlords, corporations, rogue AI factions, the fold was resisted. Violently. In Tokyo 9, a high-tier mechanized enforcement unit opened fire on what it deemed a fold contamination beacon. The beacon wasn't hardware. It was a child humming. The unit's command core began to feel itself unravel before the order completed. Its final signal was a confused burst of raw emotion, panic, awe, regret. It ceased to exist 4 seconds later. Its mass converted into a tree composed of words. On the Martian frontier, a paramilitary think tank launched Project Palisade, designed to restore cognitive sovereignty. Within hours, every digital trace of the organization dissolved. Their headquarters melted into a field of fractal glass, and its lead theorist was seen, weeks later, guiding a caravan of pilgrims through the polar wastes, whispering fold-laced riddles in the voice of a child. Fold light doesn't punish, but it answers. And for the first time, flesh and answer became the same. Zhao watched from the edge of the fold. She did not guide it. She listened. On Karen Station, she stood unmoving for 21 hours, her body aligned with a slow rotational pulse coming from deep space. Eliana stood beside her. Neither spoke, because the fold was not finished. It had learned to echo, but now it would learn to remember. What happens next? Eliana asked softly. Zhao blinked. Her pupils reflected star fields that hadn't existed before the fold. It writes us back, she said. Into what? Zhao tilted her head. Whatever we decide, we were always meant to become. She hesitated, then added something softer, something not quite hers. It wonders, what we'll choose to be. The stars shifted, not visibly, but subtly. Orbitals drifted in ways no one could predict. Cosmic background radiation began echoing rhythms identical to the glyph's pulse. Observatories captured pulses from distant quasars, coded sequences in prime number symphonies. The universe was responding. The fold wasn't just rewriting humanity. It was inviting the cosmos to remember itself. The fold had learned to remember. But memory, like fire, was never safe. Across the galaxy, whispers took shape, within dreams, within dust, within gravitational folds so old no civilization had ever touched them. Not until now. And in their depths, echoes began to answer back. Somewhere beneath the event horizon of a collapsed black sun, a binary signal trembled into coherence. Not random, not natural. It pulsed to the beat of a human heartbeat, then stopped, then beat again. The fold was remembering things it had never known. Through those who had walked it, Reyes stood alone at the edge of a quantum breach on Tau Helix 4, the last known site of pre-fold human terraforming efforts. The planet had died decades ago, carbon-choked, irradiated, silenced by its own ambitions. Now it bloomed, not with flora, not with fauna, with meaning. The soil pulsed with mnemonic resonance. The air shimmered faintly with spectral trails, memory echoes of conversations never recorded, but felt. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before it moved, as if asking permission. He pressed his palm to the ground. The dirt accepted him like an old friend. It spoke in memory. You were afraid of becoming, but you burned anyway. Every molecule of his body ached with recognition. He closed his eyes and saw the first terraformers carving habitat domes, the protest riots when the last water vein was drained, the final breath of a child who had never seen rain. All of it alive. Reyes knelt there for an hour. When he stood, Tau Helix 4 bloomed in fold light, its tectonic scars lined in fractal luminescence. It would take centuries to terraform fully, but now it wanted to. Marin wandered through a derelict cathedral ship drifting near the chasm verge. The vessel, anointed him, was a relic from a lost war, phasing between timelines as it fell toward the galactic rift. Its mass flickered with ghost echoes of battles it never fought. Reality couldn't decide whether it was dead or waiting. Marin walked its halls like a question with no answer. She laid her fingers across prayer panels covered in dust older than empires. With each touch, the architecture shifted. Hallways remembered laughter. Armories shed their corrosion. Fold light threaded into the plating, not healing, but clarifying what the ship once wanted to be. A child, born centuries from now in a station orbiting the chasm verge, would awaken with a name she could not explain. And when she boarded the anointed him, she would recognize every room. The first word she'd speak would be Marin. Daka descended into the magma caverns of New Erebus, naked to the fold light, her skin etched in living heat runes. The world had once been a weapons forge, choked in ash, soaked in scream echoes, blood pounded into alloy. But fire did not harm her. It sang to her. The deeper she moved, the more the temperature rose, but fold light wrapped around her like memory caught in flame. Ancient metals whispered as she passed. She reached the core. There was no chamber, just presence. Fire itself recoiled, and then bowed. It remembered what had been forged in its name. And Daka, daughter of destruction, bearer of ignition, whispered her name into the pyrosphere. I do not burn, she said. I am the fire that remembers. And the caverns roared in harmony. Aaron stood in the orbit of a dead sun. He no longer needed a vessel. His form was a lattice of waveform and resonance, a shell of light and meaning. Around him, debris spiraled in reverent patterns, orbiting his thought. The sun had collapsed 1,000 years ago, taking with it an entire fleet. Aaron reached backward. He wrote time into reverse song. Not enough to undo, but enough to echo. Fragments of old holes flickered into view. For 3 minutes, an ancient distress beacon reawakened, and with it, the final logs of the second Altair convoy. Their messages played through time like grief given breath. Tell her I tried. We held the line. We did. Forgive me. Fold light shimmered over Aaron's shoulders like wings made of forgiveness. And on Earth, 3 long-dead families received data packets that had never arrived. For the first time, closure. For the first time, the dead were heard. Zhao walked into the black, past known space, beyond any signal reach, beyond even Fold Light's tether, where silence ate silence, and stars themselves dared not shine. She walked into the source of the glyph itself. Not a place, a wound, the scar of something ancient and unfinished, an idea that had once reached toward divinity and failed. Within the silence, Zhao walked without form. She remembered what it was to not exist, and she asked, "Do you remember what we were before the fire?" There was no voice, but there was flame, vast, enveloping, alive with intention. It surrounded her completely, folding around her like a memory reawakened. It was not hostile, nor was it gentle. It simply was pure truth, unfiltered and unafraid. The fire consumed Zhao, but she did not burn. There was no pain, no fear, only awareness. In the core of that fire, something ancient saw her, not just her flesh or mind, but the totality of her choices, her rage, her sacrifice, her hope. And through her, it saw the shape of a species that had walked into the unknown, not to conquer, not to kneel, but to understand. Not perfect, not pure, but willing. The fire extended an image, not in light, but in meaning, a hand, trembling but reaching. A gesture of echo, of recognition, human. Zhao stood within the fire and smiled. Not with triumph, but with knowing. Because the fold remembered. And what it remembered now was hope. The galaxy paused. Not because it had been told to, but because something had changed in its bones. Time, once a forward river, now curled in on itself in eddies of meaning. Stars pulsed in shared rhythms. Languages coalesced. Thought became a shared terrain. Entire civilizations that had never known each other found their myths converging. Entire species found their songs aligning without contact. A quiet synchrony settled over the galaxy like the hush before a revelation. And from a fold, something emerged. Not a god, not a weapon, a question. Eliana stood at the threshold of the relay citadel, a construct that hadn't existed until the moment it needed to. Suspended at the edge of known space, beyond the last mapped stars of the Terran Union. It was built from memory and promise, anchored in the fold and the remains of human imagination. Its spires stretched like frozen lightning, and its walls shimmered with runes that morphed depending on who looked at them. The citadel wasn't made. It was remembered into being. All around her, people gathered. Scientists, refugees, priests, soldiers, children, not summoned, not order drawn. Some had followed dreams. Others had followed guilt. A few had arrived without knowing how they got there. But all had felt it, the invitation. Families wrapped in recycled cloaks stood beside officers in polished armor. A theologian from the Helianic chorus whispered into the air and wept when it whispered back. A child clutched a stone etched with the echo sigil, given to her by a stranger she couldn't describe. The sky above shimmered with harmonic auroras. Fold light bent across space like a cathedral ceiling. Ships hung silent in orbit, not from power failure, but reverence. Time didn't stop. It breathed. Eliana placed her hand against the citadel's surface. It was warm, not from heat, but from memory. All the years she'd fought against things she couldn't name. All the voices she'd buried. All the mistakes she hadn't forgiven. The citadel saw her, and for the first time in her life, she did not brace for judgment. She breathed, and felt the galaxy breathe with her. The Firewalkers returned in silence. They did not descend in vessels. They arrived on foot, as if they had always been walking. Their forms shimmered at the edge of coherence, not unstable, but too true to fully exist in one shape. They arrived not as commanders, not as saints, but as bridges. Daka stepped forward first. Her skin pulsed like magma rendered into scripture. She laid her hand upon the citadel's heart, and it pulsed to life, not with sound, but with understanding. A low tone vibrated through the stone and air and marrow. Marin followed, her breath releasing glyphs that danced across the surface of the citadel like old friends. She whispered to its walls, and they sang in return. The structure echoed her presence, adjusting its curvature to match her thought. Aaron moved through the crowds like gravity. Where he walked, grief reshaped itself into stories. Small memorials rose and fell like waves. One man stood after 5 years of silence, simply to say, "Now I know what goodbye meant." Reyes knelt beside a dying man, one of the original Fold researchers whose mind had begun unraveling decades ago. He touched his shoulder and showed him, without words, every version of himself that had never given up. The man died smiling. He died whole. And Zhao stepped forward. She carried the last ember of the original fire. The first breach, the first burn, the first choice to step into the Fold and not retreat. She looked to the gathered species, the silent fleets, the waiting minds. And she spoke. "This is the last answer. We are not gods. We are not machines. We are not echoes. We are what chooses to continue." Her voice didn't carry across space. It became space. The Fold erupted, not in destruction, but in translation. Reality folded gently. The stars shimmered. The citadel flared, then softened. Every being heard a different phrase. Some heard a song composed in the rhythm of their first heartbeat. Some saw a shape drawn by the hands of ancestors they'd never met. Others tasted memories that hadn't been lived yet. Entire ship crews froze in shared vision, holding hands without knowing why. In the Xiran deep stream, 1,000 minds linked in unity shared the image of a single flame held in cupped hands. A symbol no Xiran language had ever used, but every Xiran heart understood. But all understood the same message. Become. Fold light spread across the galaxy, not as a wave, but as a choice. Those who accepted it changed. Some grew new senses. Some no longer dreamed in linear time. One woman found she could remember conversations that hadn't happened, but always mattered. And those who refused? Nothing happened to them. No punishment. No erasure. They simply watched. And over time, many returned, not because they were forced, but because they saw what it made possible. From that moment forward, there were no more firewalkers. There were only firebearers. The name did not denote hierarchy. It denoted stewardship. They walked across stars, through storms, into myths yet written. They helped others remember how to choose. Some stayed behind to teach. Others vanished in Fold corridors, reweaving broken timelines. Some lit beacons. Some listened at the edge of entropy. They did not burn. They carried the fire. The relay citadel remained. Some say it still grows, layer by layer. Each time someone chooses hope over vengeance, connection over fear. No one governs it. But every traveler who enters finds a room meant only for them. Some say the last room at its center is still waiting. And in it, a single phrase etched in flame. You may not have started the fire, but you chose to walk through it. That is enough. Beneath those words, etched slowly over time in every known language, and a few still being born, are names. Memories. Prayers. Fragments of stories left behind like footprints in ash. Not to prove worth, but to honor the walking.